We're going to look at how full cost recovery works in theory and then in practice. Here we've got an example of a breakfast club project. As you can see, there are two kinds of costs at the breakfast club. We have direct costs, which might also be known as project costs or variable costs. These are the costs that will change depending on how much work we do. So at the moment in this breakfast club, there are 2 sites where breakfast clubs are offered. If there were 4, 5 or 10, you would imagine those costs would increase. The indirect costs are the costs which don't change. They're fixed, or at least relatively fixed. We might also hear them referred to as core costs, overhead or fixed costs. These costs would change a little bit, perhaps, if I went up to work in 5 breakfast club areas rather than 2. But if they just increase to 3, they may not change at all. So we can argue that they are relatively fixed. So in total, my project costs £61,750 to run. As you can see, these are the costs broken down over 2 schools. Little Acorn School, a smaller school which has 20 spaces for children, and Newtown School, which is larger. And you can see how each of the direct costs breaks down in those areas. Newtown is bigger, so it has more staff, for example. So if somebody asks how much did it cost to work in Little Acorn School, actually we can't answer them at this point, because it doesn't cost £11,750 to work in that school. We can't do that work if we don't have a manager to recruit, supervise, run safeguarding checks on our supervisors. We need them to buy the food, to negotiate the space to hold the club with the school and so on. We need an organisation to exist in order to raise the money. For example, we need our audit to take place or our accounts to be registered with the relevant body. Without those things, the work in Little Acorn School can't take place. So we need to think about how we allocate some of our indirect costs to our direct cost areas. We can do that using something called a cost driver. The cost driver allows us to push the costs from the running cost column into the columns for each of our projects, or schools in this case. A cost driver can be many different things, but it has to be something that is consistent across all of the work you do. This might be staff time, for example, number of hours delivered, number of places available on your programme, or it could even be a proportion of the total direct costs itself. For this project, we're going to use places because it's a thing that is always going to be standard in our breakfast clubs. We have 100 places in total, 20 plus 80. So that means that 20% of our work takes place in Little Acorn School, and Newtown has 80% of our work based on that particular cost driver. Let's use that cost driver to move our manager costs. As you can see, we allocate 20% of our manager to Little Acorn School, a total of £3,200. 80% of the manager costs are allocated to Newtown School. And we can work that all the way through and see clearly on the governance line how that breaks down. £200 is 20% of £1,000. Now clearly, if a third school came into being and we worked in a separate school to deliver this work, then yes, of course, those percentages would change. A fourth school would change them yet again. But right now this is a budget, and a budget is a best guess based on the information you have at that point in time. That's all it ever can be. And so for now, this is our best guess of what it really costs to work in the Acorn School. Not £11,750, but actually £15,750.